Last night was unlike any other. Darkness hung heavy over the house as I sprawled on the worn sofa, feigning sleep. My sister, Jessica, was glued to the TV, the bluish light casting eerie shadows on the walls. I wasn't truly asleep. I rarely am these days. I keep one ear tuned to the creaks and whispers of the night, always alert for what others dismiss as harmless noises. Around midnight, a strange sound pierced the monotony. A muffled voice, then the distinct click of the front door handle. My senses snapped into overdrive, adrenaline coursing through me. I stayed motionless, eyes half-lidded, pretending to be lost in some dreamless sleep. Jessica, too engrossed in her show, seemed oblivious. Then, I heard it clearly, a man's voice murmuring something unintelligible. The door creaked open. My heart raced, but my mind was already crafting scenarios. Jessica's head jerked toward the door. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling slightly. A figure stepped inside, his silhouette framed by the streetlight outside. He wasn't particularly imposing, average build, scruffy hair, wearing a jacket that looked a size too large. Still, he was an intruder, a disruption to the carefully controlled world I'd built. He seemed startled to see her, hesitating for a moment before stammering, "Oh, sorry. I thought this was a rooming house." His tone was apologetic, almost too much so. Without waiting for a response, he backed out and disappeared into the night, the door clicking shut behind him. Jessica's eyes darted to me, and I let my eyelids flutter open, pretending to wake. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice a mix of fear and disbelief. I sat up slowly, letting the moment sink in. "What happened?" I asked, my tone carefully measured. She explained, recounting the man's excuse and his abrupt exit. Her hands fidgeted nervously as she spoke. I reassured her with a casual shrug. "Probably just some drunk who got the wrong house. Don't worry about it." My voice was calm, calculated, the way it always is when I'm masking what truly lurks beneath. But inside, I wasn't calm, not in the way Jessica might think. The encounter didn't scare me. It thrilled me. Who was this man? What had driven him to choose our house, out of all the others on this quiet street? The possibilities spun in my mind like a spider weaving its web. Jessica went back to watching TV, though I could tell she wasn't paying attention anymore. Her body was tense, her eyes flickering to the door every few minutes. I stayed seated, staring at the spot where the man had stood, my thoughts spiraling deeper. The night stretched on, and Jessica eventually went to bed, locking her door behind her. I remained on the sofa, the room now silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Sleep was out of the question. I replayed the scene over and over in my mind, dissecting every detail. Whoever that man was, he'd made a mistake stepping into our home. But mistakes, I've learned, can be opportunities. He'd opened a door, figuratively and literally, and I intended to walk through it. As the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, my mind was still churning. I've always believed that the universe operates on a delicate balance of cause and effect. This man's intrusion into my home wasn't random. It was a catalyst, a spark igniting something dormant within me. Jessica emerged from her room, her eyes puffy from lack of sleep. She mumbled a half-hearted good morning and busied herself making coffee, her movements sluggish and mechanical. I watched her from the sofa, my expression neutral but my mind already miles ahead, weaving a plan. "You okay?" I asked, injecting just enough concern into my voice to appear genuine. She nodded, though her gaze was distant. "Just still freaked out about last night." "It's nothing," I said, standing up and stretching. "But if it bothers you, maybe we should make sure the locks are secure. Better safe than sorry." She nodded again, her gratitude evident in the slight smile she managed. Jessica always trusted me to handle things, and I'd never given her a reason not to. That trust was a powerful tool. By mid-morning, Jessica had left for work. I'd promised her I'd call a locksmith to reinforce the locks, a promise I had no intention of keeping. Instead, I began retracing the steps of our unexpected visitor. The neighborhood was quiet as I stepped outside, the crisp morning air biting at my skin. Our street was lined with identical houses, each one a copy-paste of the other. It's easy to disappear in a place like this, to blend into the monotony. I walked to the corner and turned, glancing up and down the adjacent street. If I were him, where would I have gone? I spent hours that day wandering the neighborhood, searching for clues. An abandoned beer can near a lamppost, a cigarette but on the sidewalk. Every detail became significant. My mind worked like a machine, piecing together fragments of a puzzle only I could see. By late afternoon, I'd found nothing conclusive. But I wasn't discouraged. The man had been real, his presence undeniable. He was out there somewhere, and I would find him. Jessica came home that evening, her mood slightly improved but still shadowed by unease. She didn't notice the way I lingered near the window, watching the street with a predatory intensity. She didn't question my sudden interest in neighborhood security. Jessica was good at ignoring things that didn't fit into her carefully structured world. That night, I waited until she was asleep before slipping out the front door. The neighborhood was a different creature in the dark, silent, oppressive, alive with unseen things. I prowled the streets, my footsteps muffled by the damp pavement. Eventually, I reached a small alleyway a few blocks away. It was narrow and dimly lit, the kind of place people avoided without knowing why. And there, half hidden in the shadows, was a man. He was slumped against the wall, nursing a bottle of something cheap and pungent. His jacket was too large, his hair scruffy. My heart quickened. It was him. I approached slowly, my movements deliberate. He looked up as I drew near, his bloodshot eyes struggling to focus. "Hey," he mumbled, his voice thick with alcohol. I crouched down to his level, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Rough night?" I asked, my tone light, almost friendly. He nodded, taking another swig from his bottle. "Yeah, you could say that." I studied him closely, noting every detail, the frayed cuffs of his jacket, the dirt under his nails, the faint bruise on his cheek. He was vulnerable, exposed, and he had no idea who he was dealing with. "You've been around here before, haven't you?" I asked casually, watching his reaction. He frowned, confusion clouding his features. "Maybe. Why?" I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Because I remember you. From last night." His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of recognition breaking through the haze. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. "You shouldn't have come to my house," I said, my tone cold and unyielding. "That was your first mistake." The man blinked at me, confusion and a hint of fear swirling in his bloodshot eyes. His hand trembled as he raised the bottle to his lips, taking another shaky swig. He didn't reply, but I could feel his apprehension growing, like the static charge before a lightning strike. I smiled again, this time letting a sliver of my true self shine through. "Second chances aren't easy to come by," I said, my voice smooth but edged with menace. "But maybe you can redeem yourself." What do you want?" he stammered, clutching the bottle like it was some sort of shield. I crouched down further, bringing my face close to his. "Answers," I whispered. "Why my house? Out of all the places you could have gone, why did you choose mine?" He shook his head, the movement jerky and uncoordinated. "It was a mistake," he mumbled. "I told you. I thought it was a rooming house. That's all." I tilted my head, studying him like a predator sizing up its prey. "A mistake, huh? Funny thing about mistakes, they always come with consequences." His breathing quickened, and he tried to push himself up, but his legs wobbled and betrayed him. He slumped back against the wall, his fear palpable now. "I didn't mean anything by it," he pleaded. "I swear." "Swearing won't save you," I said, my voice low and cold. I reached out and grabbed the bottle from his hand, inspecting it before setting it aside. "You see, you didn't just walk into my house. You walked into my world. And in my world, mistakes are costly." He whimpered, his body shrinking into itself as if trying to disappear. It was almost pathetic, really. Almost. I stood up, towering over him, and let the silence stretch, the weight of it pressing down on him. When I finally spoke, my words were deliberate, each one a needle pricking his fragile composure. You don't belong here. And yet, here you are. So tell me, what am I supposed to do with you? He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His eyes darted around, searching for an escape that didn't exist. I leaned down again, my face inches from his. You made your choice last night, I said softly. Now it's my turn. Without waiting for a response, I grabbed him by the collar and hauled him to his feet. He yelped, his limbs flailing uselessly. Dragging him out of the alley, I ignored his feeble protests. The streets were empty, the world asleep, and no one would come to his rescue. By the time we reached the edge of the woods, his resistance had faded into resigned silence. I shoved him forward, forcing him to stumble into the underbrush. Keep walking, I ordered, my tone leaving no room for argument. He obeyed, his steps unsteady and reluctant. The deeper we went, the darker it became, the trees swallowing us whole. Finally, we reached a clearing, bathed in the faint glow of the moon. I released him, and he collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. Why are you doing this? He croaked, his voice barely audible. I crouched beside him, my gaze piercing. Because you don't get to disrupt my life and walk away unscathed, I said, each word a dagger. Actions have consequences, and it's time you learned that. He stared at me, his fear now mingled with despair. Please, he whispered. I'll do anything. I leaned closer, my smile devoid of warmth. Anything? Then remember this night. Remember what it feels like to be powerless, to have your fate in someone else's hands. And if you ever set foot near my house again, I won't be so generous. I stood, leaving him trembling in the dirt. Turning my back on him, I walked away, the shadows of the forest closing in behind me. I didn't need to look back to know he wouldn't follow. As I stepped out of the woods and into the quiet streets, a sense of calm washed over me. The balance had been restored, my world put back in order. The intruder was no longer a threat, just a broken man who had dared to cross my path. And I was stronger than ever, the master of my domain. Let them come, I thought. Let them try. I'll always be ready.